It's coming out.
All right. Welcome to day 7 of the Red Nation podcast tour, guest hosted by Justine and Kaya in 2022. It's a working title.
What's happening for that?
No, I'm just kidding. I might have said a swear word in Arabic just now.
Not yet. It's going to happen.
We can promise that on this episode of the Red Nation podcast tour, guest hosted by Justine and Kaya in 2022. It's a working title. Part 6. Man, or is it day 6 or 7? I think it's 7. Kaya, what day are we on? 7. It has been 1 week nonstop since we've been on this tour. We're doing a Al Jazeera and Black Leaf Films are following us. They're doing a documentary on the Red Nation, but it's kind of like I can't like profile the Red Nation without like sort of like getting a like view on like the broader movement going on here in the Southwest that like sort of like creates a space for the Red Nation. And so I wanted to highlight a very special guest today, Samia, who I know is a Palestinian organizer here in town. Let's just start off by doing an introduction of our honored guest.
Thank you, Justine. You're too kind. And I'd just like to say how honored I am to be present here in a Red Nation sacred space. I consider it my home as well. Mm-hmm. You wanted me to kind of like talk about who I am or how I came about, or just...
Let's, okay.
So just introduce myself as an activist?
Actually, you know what? Let's introduce Melanie first. And then we'll do the grand finale with you, and you can do a giant introduction.
Yeah, the whole thing.
You all wanted me to do that? It's like this is the part you want me to concentrate on.
Hi, everyone.
You gotta it's space so that you got.
There we go. Sorry, moving a microphone around manually to do this, but hi, everyone. It's Melanie Yazzie, co-host of Red Power Hour. Came back to Albuquerque. I'm really happy to be here on day 7. This is day 1 for me. Justine and Kai have been holding it down. I am kind of amazed that you're still upright after all of this. I've done so many of these types of things for Red Nation in the past. We've been around for 8 years, founded almost exactly 8 years ago, doing some fist pumping and lifting. But now I mostly just podcast from my house, wherever I'm at. Just kind of nice. But it's really nice to join you, Samia. I always love seeing you. You're not just like a sister in struggle. I don't know. You're like part of the family, Red Nation family. And it's just really nice to be back. But I'm going to pass it back to you since you are like the rock star of the session. And just introduce yourself through like your political history, how you came to do work on Palestine. And we can talk a little bit more maybe about how we came to know each other. And the kind of work that we do together. Does that sound good, Justine?
Yeah.
Cool.
Let's take it wherever it goes today.
Heck yeah.
That's fine. Well, it's going to go organic, just like the way we organize, from the heart. Mm-hmm. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. And it's such a pleasure to see you.
I miss you.
My heart opens up when I see you. I am Samia Assed. I am a Palestinian-American human rights activist and organizer. I'm the mother of 9 children. I reside here in Albuquerque, in indigenous Tewa and Tiwa indigenous stolen land. And I hail to you from Beit Hanina, occupied Palestine. So, I came into organizing as an adult. I think the long story of it is that the short story of a very long journey is I have my children were volunteering for a youth radio organization, and it was called Generation Justice. Mm-hmm. And at the time, my children would come home and bring all the stories home of the true struggles. Even though I grew up in New Mexico, that's essentially how I grew up to see New Mexico from the lens of community, not in a systemic way, in systemic education. And I got to organize on Palestine vis-a-vis the war on Gaza, or the post the Intifada in Palestine, and everything that happened overseas. We had a protest, we organized, and I got my foot in the door, like I said, through community organizing with my children, and got connected to the Albuquerque Center for Peace and Justice. And it was there with some of the activism that we had on Palestine that we incorporated indigenous activism, and there began the romance with the Red Nation and the bromance, or the sisterhood. I don't know what the right word for that.
Feminist version of a bromance.
I was going to say.
Can we just time out here?
Well, let's get a good one.
You need to figure that one out, Professor.
Okay, we're going to figure that out before. That's going to be the title of the podcast, first of all. Okay. But we're going to figure this out before we're done.
All right.
Absolutely.
I'll write it down.
Well, and there's just so many memories to even recount, because the amount of work we did in 2013, 2014, and up. I mean, it was remarkable to see the birth of the Red Nation and have it coincide with Palestinian solidarity and Palestinian organizing. And for me, as an organizer, I never thought of organizing without incorporating a decolonizing lens, and that is the indigenous struggle. And I was introduced to that and educated on that. I mean, I used to hear of old days. I know my father was an activist, and he used to be involved in AIM. But to live the experience on the ground, in action, in everyday interaction, is a whole different, it's just a different experience. And it really solidifies what solidarity looks like. And for me, it was just it was home to me. I was very comfortable, and I saw it. The international lens is extremely important when you want to talk about Leonard Peltier, or you want to talk about Palestine, or you want to talk about water rights, or how do we decolonize. I get it. For Palestine, I got it from the get-go. It took me a little while to understand how to decolonize New Mexico, and it was through Red Nation and the work we did together. And there's just so much to talk about it. And if I skipped a whole bunch, let me know.
Tell us what organization you're in right now, or what does your organizing work look like right now?
My organizing work right now is concentrates on women's rights issues. I sit on the national board of the Women's March. I was on the C4, now I'm on the PAC, and I'm also chair of the New Mexico Women's March. I also sit on the Human Rights Board of the city, and I'm an active Palestinian active. I do a lot of Palestinian work. I'm the chair of the Southwest Coalition for Palestine. That's what some of the work that we do. So I'm a grassroots feminism. You're grassroots feminism, environmental justice, human rights, civil rights. All of that is all tied. International human rights. They're all tied in together. You really cannot separate one from the other if you really want to have an impact on one. So if that's what you ask me.
Wow.
And you're part of everything I do. I mean, you're always there.
I'm like, where do we start?
I don't. Is it okay if I say something?
Yeah, start? Totally. Yeah, let's. You know what? I'm gonna switch the mic so that it goes all the way around instead of just in the front.
Worries. Okay. I can also move this closer to me as I speak.
Okay. I think we'll
Test.
be fine.
If it's okay right now.
Yeah, my voice is big enough. Your voice is big enough.
Yeah, I can.
Okay.
I can take it up a few decibels.
Okay.
So I was right. So the Red Nation started in 2014, like summer, fall of 2014. And I remember when I went to Palestine in May of 2011, so a little over 11 years ago. And I learned about settler colonialism primarily because of my experience in Palestine. At that time, like, people were just starting to really talk about and theorize what settler colonialism was. And so we went on a field school through the University of New Mexico here as a PhD student at the time. Anthropology and American Studies co-sponsored it, and it was an explicitly decolonial field school. And so we went to Palestine to understand the history of the struggle for the liberation of Palestine through a decolonial lens, or a lens that was centering, pushing back against settler colonialism,
Yeah.
Israeli settler colonialism. And when I came back here, the Red Nation had not been, it wasn't something that was even on my mind yet at that time. I really cut my teeth in organizing through Palestine and water rights. And this was like 2011, 2012. And then the attack on Gaza in this, I believe it was the summer of 2013, I was working with another comrade of ours, Andrew Curley. He's a Dene PhD. He's a professor and also an activist. We started a little group. It was a little tiny group with like 5 people called Dene Solidarity with Palestine. And that was like 2013. And so we did a series of actions in Window Rock in the Navajo Nation that summer. And we were trying to do like a white paper and some other stuff. And so by the time the summer of 2014 rolled around, and then Cowboy and Rabbit were murdered on the west side of Albuquerque, there was those of us who were at the very kind of beginning of the Red Nation had already been doing deep work on Palestine. And so the reason why I'm just documenting this history really briefly is because really Palestine was always at the center and always at the heart of the Red Nation's conception of indigenous liberation in Turtle Island. And that it was, in fact, I think the experience of some of us Native people primarily, who had either been to Palestine or understood the question of Palestine within indigenous politics here. The notion of solidarity, and now what we now do is internationalism, like a left internationalism, actually came out of the work that we were doing on Palestine at the very beginning. So the Red Nation has always, we don't just advocate for Palestinian liberation. It's much more profound than that.
Yeah.
It's literally like we can't do what we do without Palestine and the liberation of Palestine at the center. And I think we've always understood that.
Yes.
As Indigenous people, we've always new people who come into the org, and now we've sent like 10 people. We've sent a bunch of Indigenous, Justine, sent Justine to Palestine. And just like we've radicalized, I think, an entire almost like cadre or a generation of young Indigenous radicals here in the Southwest through Palestine. I mean, yes, the work we do here, but I don't know, like those delegations, it was probably really pivotal for you, right?
Yeah.
In terms of your political development.
Yeah. And you know what? Like, that being said, like, I think that Red Nation has had such like a huge like ripple wave effect on like the greater indigenous movement embracing like Palestine, because the Red Nation was the only indigenous organization that I had ever heard of that talking about Palestine. And this was during a time when like I didn't even know what Palestine was when I first started organizing. I joined the Red Nation in 2018. I started radicalizing probably around around 2017, and then I found the Red Nation. But even when I got to the Red Nation, I didn't fully understand like what the whole like deal was. And it's like really simple for me though, because like it was learning about settler colonialism that like really just locked everything together. And I'm a visual learner, so even that like banner up there, I don't know if you can see it from here, but you know the famous like United States like turning Indian land into reservations, and Israel turning
visualizing the map.
Yeah, and how like Palestinian land just shrinks into the reservations basically in like the same way. That like really just all locked it in for me. And I went to Palestine in November 2019, and it was like on the cusp of the pandemic. I was like, holy crap, like I couldn't believe like I traveled internationally just like a couple months before we shut down. But going out there and seeing everything, I was what we call yoded.
Yoded.
I was the connections. I was just like making connections. I felt like I was like building a bridge to like from like Pueblo lands to Palestine for the first time, and it was all because of the Red Nation talking about Palestine at all. And like I said, now we see like these major, huge organizations like Indian Collective who are talking about Palestine now, and even at that, like you see how Palestine's talked about like on social media and everything, and like I just really can't help but feel that like Red Nation had like a huge a huge part of it.
Absolutely.
And but yeah, when it was pivotal in my radicalization and like politicization.
Yes,
And yes,
that is what that word is.
yeah. Stupid English. Yeah.
The meaning came across loud and clear. The significance for me to see Indigenous youth go to Palestine and essentially find themselves
Oh,
and their identity,
that's exactly what it is.
and it is the inspiration of a fight and struggle for liberation. You see it, and you connected to it because it was raw, it was present, and the resilience, I think, within the struggle appealed to you, right? Within the struggle on the ground, the way people persisted despite a very brutal occupation, and not to say, to take away from indigenous the indigenous torment throughout centuries in your homeland, but yeah, it brought past present, and I could see that. I saw that. It clicked right away. You see it, and I feel it, and that's what's so special. I do believe that the Red Nations political moment came out with the platform and the stance on Palestine. You did have an impact, and much like the Black Lives Matter movement came in with the Black community, the Black movement had previous stances with solidarity, as did the Indigenous. But I think with the Red Nation, it sealed the deal, especially for youth. And with all the struggles that you're facing from the extraction business, within your water rights, within everything you talk about with the women's rights and missing and murdered women, you name it, on every front, it's there. It's connected. You cannot not connect it. And it would be a crime not to connect it in a time where social media is so accessible in every space that you're in. Everybody owns a phone. Your grandma owns a phone. Your little nephew owns it. The narrative is there. And yes, thank you for all the work you do, and I look forward to building with you for our liberation.
Until liberation.
Yeah, until liberation, absolutely.
When one of the things that was pretty profound for me when I got back from Palestine was, it's kind of like, it's almost like like it's all happening right now, but in a way it's kind of like going back in time, and like the project of settler colonialism in a way, because this has been going on for like what, like 80 years or something like that, since Israel came to
74
be.
years, but the much from the 1800s, mid 1800s. Yeah.
Yeah, and like in the United States, it's been like almost, I don't know, I don't know what year it is right now. Yeah, like centuries or whatever. But it was kind of like going to a time when, like, back in time to, like, I guess what I'm trying to like say is like there's generations of people who have existed under settler colonialism, and in Palestine there's only been so many, and then in the United States there's been like many generations of like indigenous people who have been going through settler colonialism, like over,
Yeah.
through time. And to see like people still like just revved up in their like struggle, like you see like entire families who are like resisting, you see entire communities who are resisting, who still have that like fire going. And whereas like in like indigenous families and indigenous communities, I couldn't help, on the plane home I was crying so much, because I was I think I was like hurting for my people, because like if you think of like the resistance in Palestine, if you think of like a fire that's like burning and raging and like going and just like with all of its might, and you look at the indigenous struggle here, like in like in our communities, it feels like that fire, of course the fire is alive, but it's like it's almost as if it's like embers or something. And I remember like one of like just like even seeing like how men like interact with each other, there's that like camaraderie and love, and they hug and they kiss, and like they're just so embracing to one another, and because they're in struggle together, they're comrades.
Absolutely.
Whereas here, like, I had never seen that before. And
Because
so
it was by design, honey. The colonization did that to you. It meant to break communities and their traditions and the connection, the networking. We even see it in our families. You fall into the pressure of capitalism and the lifestyle of capitalism. People start separating. You just want to build for yourself. The most important thing you can do for a community is come back and talk about the community at large, the love for one another, the mission for, and the mission is one. The heart is one. And but I'm sorry if I lost. I just wanted to point that out. It's just
no, yeah, that's exactly what it is. And when I saw like how I said, like I was like mourning for my people, when and but I was also like mourning for like Palestinians, like could they ever be us? Could they be like could they become 2% of the population, or 1% of the population, only have rights to like 2% of the land or something
mhm.
like that? Could they ever become like as broken as we are? And like I was just like really facing these like like horrific futures, I guess. And it took me months to process all of
That's
that.
a lot.
It took me months to get there. I remember it finally like all clicked for me at one point, and I was like I was crying again just as much as I was crying on the plane home, because I was like,
It's
oh
a
my,
lot.
yeah,
It's
like
a lot.
it's so much. Like I said, I got freaking yoded out there.
Yoda is. I'm going to steal on that word. If you
Yeah.
don't mind.
Please do.
Yeah.
You know, you cannot talk about manifest destiny. You have to talk about manifest destiny and the doctrine of discovery and the impact it had on indigenous communities 500-600 years ago, where there were no cameras, there were no books, there were no storytellers. There were storytellers, but they were not, the Crusades were so violent that it devastated the indigenous life, and exterminated everything in front of them. And what they didn't exterminate, they enslaved. They brought in, the black community. So there was no opportunity for the indigenous community to organize and to collect, right? You see now with now the revival of the indigenous movements and understanding and putting context to a global international lens. With the Palestinians, I think in 1948, when the Israelis came in, and the British before that had been handing land and slowly trying to eradicate different communities within Palestine through pushing them out and giving land to the new Israeli settlers. I think their luck for Israel is that the Palestinians are not going anywhere. They learned their lesson from 1948, and they're saying either we die here or we're not going anywhere. And every other day we're threatened with transfer, transfer, transfer. People at this point, the awareness has has pushed the Palestinians into a position of, we're not stepping back an inch, and the Israelis know it. And it's the constant harassment, the constant political pressure on Palestinians. I mean, the devastation with taking over lands, redistricting, taking punitive measures against people, whether it's shutting down this town or shutting down travel or taking away the basic rights of water or land or trade or every possibility of life can really cripple societies. It can. But the I think in my mind the resilience of the Palestinians is what's keeping them at bay, and the strong belief as a community that they believe in their cause. It's a just cause, and I have to say the mothers of Palestinian mothers are very strong, and the men are, and that's extremely important. The education rate is very high. people know exactly what they want, and they'll continue the fight. We are facing, as Palestinians, we're facing one of the most aggressive, brutal military might in that part of the world, but we persist.
It's so interesting. I'm actually not sure I've ever heard you say that before about your trip to Palestine. I would talk to you for a long time about it. You've probably like been able to reflect, Justine, like and like come to some sort of conclusions about it in a way that we haven't even checked in about Palestine in a long time. But what you're saying about like the temporality, right? That the occupation, although it's been going on since the 19th century, it's like condensed in a way in Palestine. And so there's like a very vibrant present spirit of resistance that is multi-generational, right? Every
Yes.
household. And like you said, there's like a strong sense of solidarity between people that doesn't necessarily exist here, partly because it's protracted. Like our colonization is much longer. It's like 500 plus years at this point. But what the reason why that I'm commenting on that is because it's like all of the indigenous people I know who've been to Palestine, including myself and other Red Nation members, it's like like you said, the embers. It's like we remember in a way, we remember our like humanity and like the resistance that's baked into who we are as indigenous people, this identity we carry in our hearts by going to Palestine. And it's like the samud, right?
Samud, yes, right.
Samud. It's that steadfastness, right?
Yes,
I just
yes.
put my hand into a fist because it's like you are using the word resilience, but it's like we are not going to budge ever.
Absolutely not.
And good fucking luck. That's basically what it is. When you have women on the front line, it's like good luck.
and there's no way you get. They're not. They're not going anywhere.
They're not going anywhere.
Absolutely not.
And that, like, it is sometimes hard, I think, for indigenous people here in the belly of the beast of the U.S. empire to feel that steadfastness in our hearts, because we're surrounded by, just like the effects of colonialism run so deep in our families and in our communities. People give up a lot, and they lose hope that liberation is possible. And so something that the Red Nation does is we like fan the embers, we fan the flames essentially. And like, that's one of the essential things we do. But I will say that it's a reciprocal relationship with Palestine, because the gift you give us is that we see that you remind us of our strength and who we are. And I talked to some comrades of ours, about a month and a half ago, earlier this summer, Demetrius Johnson and Cheyenne Antonio, they're two of our Red Nation comrades. They went to California to a Palestinian youth movement gathering, and they were asked to get up and speak, and they were speaking, and all of these young Palestinian people came up to them after, and they were crying. And they're like, the way you speak about us, we're beautiful.
Absolutely.
You speak about us like we're beautiful. And they're like, we don't see ourselves that way. And you reminded us, right, that we're beautiful. You reminded us like where our strength is. I'm going to cry.
I'm literally crying right now. I'm crying right now.
And so it's like, and these are mostly Palestinian youth who are in the diaspora, right? Probably some of them have never been back to Palestine because of the complications of traveling, and their families' homes are probably occupied by Zionist settlers and things like that. So they don't have anywhere to go back to. And so they're here, right? And it's like, they basically told Dee and Shai, they're like, you reminded us of the spirit of resistance. You reminded us that we're beautiful and that we're strong.
They reminded them of their self, their self, and the reason for their existence. Just talking about that, it's extremely important to be reminded of what, it's a form of self-preservation, to be reminded in the storytelling and how you impact others. So you just don't impact your space. It's contagious to different communities, right? And as I see from my own personal living experience within the indigenous community, I see it, and it's hard sometimes to not get, for a second, lose the concentration on Palestine, and you just want to give up, but there's no way. It comes back to you, and I'm thankful that I'm in the circle here to remind me, okay, this is the struggle.
If you have moments where you need to take a break and you feel like giving up, we're going to be there to carry you through
I
those
don't doubt
moments.
it. I don't doubt it.
Because you do that for us.
Thank you.
I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No,
I
no,
just
no.
feel like there's a special relationship between Indigenous people of Turtle Island and Palestinians.
There is. There's definitely,
Where
and
we
it's
keep each other going in a unique way because of our shared desires for decolonization and liberation from settler colonialism. And that's deeper. That's not just a political relationship. There's something deeper about it that I think is incredibly profound and will be the anchor of any successful liberation struggle that's going to happen.
100%.
I believe that in my heart. Like, I foresee that.
You know, I was born in Michigan. I lived overseas during my childhood, and I went back as a young adult, and I got married there, met my husband there, and came back, and went back during the peace treaty in the 96 so-called peace treaty with the so-called second state, two-state farce. But there was a time where I came here and visited and went back to Palestine, and I was sent back by the Israelis, and I was held captive for 3 days in the airport with 7 kids. I don't talk a lot about this, and it's hard to talk about that experience because I was in a wheelchair. I had hurt my leg. I was pregnant, child number 8, and I had daughters who were teenagers and young little boys who ran around with their little toys, and they were chased by Israeli soldiers. Everybody was threatened by their mere presence. But that experience of sitting down and having to witness so many people from different nationalities come through the airport, and the one thing that's just recorded straight in my mind is when I was the Israeli general or official that was in the airport questioning me. He looked at me and he says, he stormed the door. He kicked the door in my face. He says, "Ruha betak, go to your home." And he was blonde, blue-eyed. You're Ashkenazi Jew. And I looked at him. I was in shock. I was in mere shock. I still have not processed that whole incident because I saw their interactions with my daughters, their interactions with my little boys, the way they separated me at gunpoint with my kids. There was a point which they separated me from my kids, and then they took them on the plane. We went back on our plane, and they had me go from one direction, and the children, the emotional, psychological warfare that they play with you. They just had the guns at their head. And as there was a story where they took me up and they lifted me because I was in a wheelchair. There were 2 young ladies, 2 Israeli women, soldiers, who were whispering in my ear, "You're never going to come back. You're never going to come back. You will never have another opportunity. Bye-bye. We can't wait to get rid of you." And that has sat in my heart since 2001. It was right after September 11th. And I don't talk about this much, but the images, colonization, occupation, you name it. What name can you describe that? But I came home to Albuquerque and found my indigenous community that stood up and saw me for what I was. And I see you.
You start crying again.
Don't even get me started because I cried for months. It was very hard. And everybody published it, but I haven't been back since then. So they kicked me out for 10 years. Occupation is very real. The apartheid system. Apartheid is not even enough. You have to say it's martial law, apartheid, the worst cases of settler colonialism in every aspect. So you have to fight it from every lens. But for sure, on a human rights perspective, it's a heavy toll. But I never miss an opportunity. That's why I promised myself to always organize with people who understand colonization, and you educated me on that as well. It's a different lived experience. And also understanding that I, as a U.S. citizen, am a settler. It's very hard for us as Palestinians to even cope with that because we still have the baggage back home. So to have to just want to come and make money and send everything to sustain families back home. So, it's just we're caught up with a very difficult lifestyle. But you have to step back and recognize each other's humanities and understand what the enemy is, understand how powers play. And what I was trying to say is, I don't want to ever miss an opportunity to give a platform to Indigenous voices, to Black voices, to Brown voices, to communities who suffer from colonization, because it's alive and well. It comes back. It came back with corporate America, right? But in Palestine, it is point blank colonization, settler colonialism. So I didn't mean to upset you. I thought it was
No, you didn't upset me. Oh man, I'm gonna be honest. I didn't expect to get this emotional. I don't know what I was expecting.
We're all emotional. It's a bundle of.
I'm like going through like a series of emotions because like I get like so profoundly like happy and in awe of like the love and solidarity that exists between Indigenous people, and then I'm going like down to a low where I'm like just angry and sad about like colonization and hearing like how the IDF treated you and just like how ugly that is. And every time we talk about Palestine, I'm just like out here yoded. But like one thing that like is going through my mind like hearing you talk is it's sort of like true to what my original like mission I felt like was when I went to Palestine. And I remember praying before leaving on the plane and stuff, and sort of like saying like I wish to build bridges, or I wish to like build bridges from Pueblo lands to Palestine. And like I guess just bridging the struggle just in my own head. I mean, obviously because there's obviously like so much work already and stuff, but even like I and then I started thinking about Standing Rock, and like even like in Nick's book, you're quoted saying that Standing Rock was the indigenous Intifada, and how when I was out there in Palestine, I always talk about like my like profound moment when we went to the, I think it was the Ida refugee camp. Is that the one right
Ida.
outside of yeah. In Bethlehem, or outside of it, right outside. Yeah. And that was when we were standing on a corner, and on the corner there's a memorial for this Palestinian kid who was murdered by the IDF. He was sniped, and directly across the street from that is a mural that has the names of 300 children who were murdered by the IDF in Gaza. And at that, we're talking about this memorial, and at that same moment, there's a group of children who run around the corner with a soccer ball, and they look like they're having fun. They're playing, it's just another day. They're just moving to play. Well, but they're moving where they were playing because the IDF threw like tear gas canisters at them, and eventually the IDF threw tear gas canisters at us. And this was also the same. It just took me back to like these are the exact same tear gas canisters that were used in Standing Rock. And then these are the exact same tear gas canisters that are used during the Black Lives Matter uprisings just that next summer.
Yeah.
And it's I just like I said, I'm yoded at how much it all really connects, and how I was ever in a position in the first place where I didn't understand like why Palestine, when it's all so clearly laid out for us. And it's the Red Nation and Palestinian comrades who like brought me to that thinking. And really it was like the key to understand the international struggle of all of this, and how US imperialism works, and how settler colonization works. And it just makes me, like it just makes you realize like how like pivotal in my political development, like understanding Palestine was, and how we use that key now here across Turtle Island to get that message out, or to like
Yeah.
make that clear and stuff. And that's just what's going through my mind as we talk about all of this. And just, yeah, I'll stop there.
Yeah, you reminded me of a very important point of, like, we can understand as indigenous communities colonization. New Mexico itself, the Chicano community, like you said, Palestine was in indigenous communities. I found it there. I found it in the Chicano communities. I find it in the Black communities. Um, they understand colonization, but the awareness, more awareness came out, especially with social media being so available in different spaces. Well, somewhat available, because that's another thing with the broadband availability. But having to talk about issues that impact Americans, like imperialism, for Americans seems to be so far away, and they do not understand it's right home in their backyard. When we saw the death of the youth, black youth that was killed by APD, Albuquerque Police Department, and the SWAT team. They used a canister that was thrown, tear gas canister that was thrown into the homes. They still don't have, the final. The investigation still continues, but it was kind of obvious it was because the SWAT team threw in something in there that caused a fire, and a 14-year-old boy was killed and burned alive, burned to death.
His name is Brett
Resino.
Brett
And his
Resino.
father was killed by the police in a police shooting as well. The cycle of violence continues. But what I meant to say is that you're right. The tear gas is available and is used by police departments, and the American police have been militarized and been trained to be militarized by primarily the Israelis, and among others who train police officers who should, against a civilian population with military grade equipment. They're not far away. Anybody, and unfortunately, what's happening with the country, we see the shift with the new Supreme Court decisions, the rulings on Roe and the right to dissent, and the horrific rulings on indigenous sovereignty and the Environmental Protection Agency and all of that needs another 10 shows to talk about. But basically saying Americans still haven't seen the real face of what's going to happen to them. It's right there. And we know we are ready in many ways, or we still need to educate more people on the realities of where canisters come on, where weaponry, what the military industrial complex really looks like, and how it impacts us, not just from Palestine to New Mexico, to Ferguson, to everywhere, to indigenous communities in every space. So I just had to remember that, and I just wanted to bring that up.
Every tear gas canister says "Made in the USA," and and then they're field tested in Palestine. And I'm glad you brought up Brett Rossano, because we, the Red Nation, went to that action that was on, what day was it, Kyan? Monday?
It was Friday night.
Friday night.
Yeah.
We went to that
6
action.
days ago.
Yeah. And when we were there, Palestine was present there too, because they said Albuquerque Police Department is sent to Israel to train with the IDF.
Yes.
And then it was those same tear gas canisters that were thrown at this boy.
And the education is key here. We have to remind people what is happening in our communities. Americans in large, they know somewhat about Palestine, but they really don't understand how it's impacted directly to their communities. It goes to the school to prison pipeline. It goes to the gun rights. Everything you name, it's all connected, and you follow the money. That's why, in many ways, it's really important for us to have these conversations, to continue to educate and lift voices and let people know how they organize, for us to counter those organizing, how they train police who we pay for as citizens with tax dollars for the U.S. system. We can fight. We can organize. We still can do that, and let's do that before that's taken away from us. Absolutely. And I want to take a minute right now we talk about the victims of the military, the direct killing of Shireen Abu Akleh, who was an American Palestinian journalist. President Biden went to Palestine and just stood there and reconfirmed that he was a Zionist. Zionism is racism. And no matter how you label it, Zionism is racism. I, as a Democrat, and I'm an active part of the Democratic Party, I'm very active. I felt so down, so miserable for days, like it was a dagger in the back and in the gut, because here you are, we are voting for you against Trump, the radical racist, and here you are going to say, oh, I'm still the Zionist, not understanding what that meant for a whole community, and not even talking about Palestine in a real leadership role. Shireen Abu Akleh was not even acknowledged as a real victim. He went to Saudi to hold him accountable for Khashoggi, which was important. But the Saudi prince right away told him, oh, what did you do about Shireen Abu Akleh, who was an American Palestinian? Why are you asking me about Khashoggi, and you're not doing anything about your American Palestinian journalist who was killed by the Israelis? So the double standard is you can't hide it anymore, and people are very, very frustrated. So, but that's one of the things we also talked about here with the Red Nation, as maybe a possible collaboration of doing a mural for Shireen here and having indigenous artists hopefully do the work, do the mural, which is a form of resistance, right? This is how we organize and we resist, and to make sure we're present and honor her spirit. She was a very, very powerful journalist, but she was so skilled. She was so skilled as a speaker. The Arabic language is a very deep, descriptive, beautiful language, and she carried the message very well to the Arab public. So her message was very dangerous to the bigger, broader project of normalizing Arab countries. Forget the Palestinians. They dismissed us completely on this last trip. But we're not going anywhere. We're here. And we're going to make sure Shireen has a face in every city in America. That's a lot to talk about, but the analogies are so prevalent and in your face, you cannot escape it.
That's true.
Yeah, I tend, like when you're a revolutionary, right? Optimism is your greatest weapon, and so you live in that space eternally. Like you're always very few, and also as an Indigenous person, you cannot not be future oriented.
Yeah.
You must believe, like in your heart of hearts, that your people will have a future in their land, in their homelands, and that they will not lose those lands completely, that they will not be eradicated completely.
Yeah.
Because you have to. That's just, you would cease to be Indigenous and you would cease to be a revolutionary if you gave up that. It's not even a hope. It's like, this will happen. I know that this will happen. And like, that's what I mean when I use the word optimism. But it's, you occupy that space as a revolutionary, even though the story, which like you said, you haven't shared that story of you being detained at the airport and your children being moved around at gunpoint by the IDF. And this Israeli, this IDF soldier, getting into your face or in your ear saying, go home. What was it again?
It slapped the door. It kicked the door in my face.
Kicked the door in
said,
your face.
Ru'a bitak means go to your home. It's like, you're a blonde, blue-eyed Ashkenazi Jew. Ashkenazi meaning they're from European Jews.
So was the implication of go to your home mean to go back to the U.S.?
The U.S.,
Okay.
Yes, of course.
So, right, there's a common refrain that cops and white and Hispano vigilantes in a place like New Mexico, Hispanos have a proximity to whiteness and they participate in the particular way that white supremacy performs anti-Indianism and settler colonialism in a place like New Mexico. And the refrain that you hear in places like Albuquerque and Gallup and Farmington, these border towns, is go back to the reservation. Or something similar to what was said to you. And the implication is that you don't belong here. This isn't your home. Go back to the place where you belong, right? As if like Indigenous people don't belong here. And as if this motherfucker does belong here and isn't like a newcomer and a settler, right? Who is actively participating in the erasure of Indigenous presence
That's right.
on our own homelands. And so just like what you saw with all of those people just streaming in, here you are, you're being detained, you're being terrorized, you and your family, you're actually Palestinian, you're actually from that place, and you can't even just go to your own home, right? And all of these people are probably just treating your home like Disneyland. They're just like going on tours, they're just there to like go see like all of the Christian iconography and things like this. It's the same. It is actually the same being Indigenous in New Mexico, because not only is the culture of settler colonialism such that it's enforced, it's part of like the common sense of New Mexico culture that Native people are supposed to be seen but not heard, that we are supposed to be silent, that we're supposed to be pleasant, that we are only allowed to be represented through the objects that we create for the tourist gaze and for the tourism industry. And so literally here too, you literally see people streaming in to your homelands. And they're not being told to go back where they come from. The actual settlers who terrorize people here, like the Albuquerque Police Department, they're not from here. They're not from here. And here they're being trained by these settlers who are terrorizing and murdering and genociding your people in another place. And so Indigenous people constantly in Albuquerque are just being like pushed around and being told, you don't belong here, you don't belong here, shut the fuck up, like we don't want to hear what you have to say, like we're just going to murder you, we're going to decapitate you over here. I mean, we all know that this happens on a regular basis to Indigenous people, especially like lumpen proletariat, like people who live on the streets, people who don't have enough money to like have stable housing. And it really is the same thing. And that right there, like what you described your experience in the airport and what I'm describing just being like Indigenous in public in New Mexico, that's what settler colonialism is, right? It's like people are just streaming onto your land and they don't have any respect. They don't have any notion of your presence. And they just like look right through you. And they'll just like trample your sacred sites. And meanwhile, the state is perfectly happy to detain you and terrorize you and incarcerate you and kill you. And so this is really like apartheid. Even the term settler colonialism isn't enough.
It's not enough.
It's not enough. Like
It's
what?
not enough.
Even terror isn't enough to describe what it's like. It's like the daily lived reality of being an Indigenous person who is actively being colonized over and over and over again, like 1,000 times a day. Am I right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's literally
Absolutely,
what
yeah.
it's like.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to trigger anyone. It's
No.
just that it's talking about similarities and like why there's a profound relationship between our struggles. That's why.
There is. I'm going to tell you. I'm sorry.
Sorry.
Real quick, I was just gonna say, speaking of Disneylands, we're just speaking now and you talking, this reminds me of when the Red Nation went to Pueblo Disneyland, aka Santa Fe, New Mexico, and during that time and it's the same exact thing. And that was for that action. Remember when there was that mural, the wheat
With
pastry,
Remy.
by Remy. And it was the IDF detaining this Palestinian kid, putting the band, whatever, covering their eyes, tying a thing around their head, and what that was meant with in Santa Fe. And I remember Nick saying that there was a white woman from the church across the street who was very upset by that, but also the folks who were part of the action were saying like, you're on stolen land, and she's like, yes, but I got the deed. It was just like so freaking great. Yeah, I drove
It's the most settler thing in the world
ever.
That is so
I drove by there the
violent.
other day,
right?
and then it also makes you think of like how the positioning. I'm gonna put this image in the final cut of all of this, but it also like how it was almost like the exact same picture of that child being depicted, being detained by the IDF. The same exact thing, the same exact way happened to Jen Marley during the Entrada, where
I remember that.
they're having a genocide parade about us, the Pueblo people specifically, and Jan Marley is in her traditional regalia. Anytime the Red Nation does anything, it's an actual ceremony, and they detain her. And there's nothing over her eyes, but you can look at the images side by side, the exact same thing of the IDF detaining this Palestinian youth, and then the Santa Fe Police Department detaining this indigenous woman. I just wanted to quickly talk about that because that's going through my mind, and just to sort of speak to like some of the work that Red Nation has done. I didn't mean to interrupt your thought. Go ahead.
No. You just brought back a very raw experience for all of us when Jen Marty was at and all of the Red Nation comrades were in Santa Fe. It was an interesting event because all the ugliness came out. There's a lot of people who
the
claim to be
Oh my God.
racism,
who claim to be wonderful. The racism,
the hatred.
the hatred is so bad, so bad. I cannot even tell you. Well, you guys know the levels of racism, Islamophobia,
Oh God.
all those who proclaim to be human rights activists who, except for Palestine and except for indigenous folks, right? They dismiss you. And, it takes me back to the experience in the airport. There's 2 other incidents.
And I'm sorry to bring that up again.
No, it's good. It's healing for me.
Okay.
Because I haven't talked about it much. I'm still going to write the book one of these days because the images are still engraved vividly in my mind. There was one point where they had us separated all during the daytime, but at nighttime, they take us to a room. There was no rooms to put, they didn't want us in the crowd with 7 kids just being present because it was an upsetting sight for Palestinians who were passing by, for others who saw a woman in a wheelchair with 7 children just laying around. And so where they would take us, they would take us to a little nursing room, little small room that they set aside for any woman that wanted to go nurse her babies. And we'd stand there. The soldiers would be there to watch us right over our head. And there was a point where there was a white woman, an Israeli woman, who walked in with her baby to nurse her. She came in, she looked at us, and was so disgusted. She was disgusted to be in the same room with us. Went to the Israeli official that was in the front desk and asked to be removed to a different space. She did not want to be in the same space as a Palestinian mother with her children.
Ugh, that's so ugly.
That's the ugly nature. And I had the opportunity to talk to other Israeli soldiers. Some of the Arab Israelis were a little more comfortable talking to me. But there was a point where we were sitting down, all of us. I had 7 children sitting down. My daughters were 14 and 16. One of them just turned 16. 5 girls and then, 2 boys. And there was about 9 Israeli soldiers, female, just looking at us at night, just gazing at us. And I looked at them, and it was just me and the kids. And I said, "Are you guys okay? Is there a problem?" Because I was worried about my kids. And they said, No, we're just wondering. You're so lucky you have 7 kids. We can't get our men to marry us. The irony of me being deported, and look what they look at. They never even looked at the humanity of holding a mother of 7, but the envy.
Yeah.
They're so empty.
Oh my God.
The envy of.
So they're like pretendians. Or they're like
It's like, oh, we wish they all go to, our men go to, Tel Aviv, the nightclubs. Nobody wants to get married. Nobody wants to commit. And here you are with 7 kids. They even envy.
It's like
the
what?
You're
like
what
detaining and
colonization-
deporting and actually like a
And all you
and then
can
you
do is
like
be jealous.
and then you're like you want her life, but what?
Because colonization is empty and is unsustainable. It's unsustainable, and what there's empires that come and go.
Yeah. Me and Kyan went to go eat at this racist ass restaurant the other day called Pig and Fig, and I couldn't help but think about. I know, and it after just learning about the horrors of like nuclear colonialism, because we're in White Rock. We're looking at all of the landfill spill sites and toxic waste dumps, and just like how they like totally like effed up the whole area. And immediately after learning about the horrors of nuclear colonialism, we go eat at this like honky restaurant called Pig and Fig. Negative 1,000 review. And me and Kyan,
Negative?
yeah, negative one.
Wow.
Personally, that's my review on their restaurant. Negative 1,000 out of 5 stars. And
There's a lot of racists.
after learning about the horrors of nuclear colonialism, and then we go across the street from the White Rock Visitor Center to eat at this honky restaurant called Pig and Fig, and there's like a baby racist like as cashier. She's like a teenager, blonde hair. I don't remember the color of her eyes. And me and Kyan walk up to like order our lunch, and we're like, "Can we get a cup of ice?" And she's like, "No." And we asked her like 3 times in our interaction with her, "Can we get a cup of ice? Can we get a cup of ice?" And she's like, "No," every time. She's like, there's ice in the water." There wasn't ice in the water. The water is cold. The water wasn't cold. And we eventually, me and Kyan just give up, and we walk outside to go get our table. And we're with these folks here, and they will all walk outside with glasses of ice. And I was like, "So the Indians can't have ice?" And like, I went back inside.
Every day.
I went back inside, and I was like, because I was like, "What the fuck?" Like, I was like, "Wow, I don't know. I just blame racism like that. I just can't let it go." And so
It hurts.
and
It hurts. It
and I
hurts.
went inside, and I was like, "So what? The Indians can't have ice?"
You said that to her?
Yeah, I was like,
Yeah.
I was like, all the white people in our crew got ice, and all of a sudden you have ice for them. And then she's like, "Oh, but no, I'm so sorry. I didn't know that they were with you." What? Yeah.
She's like, "Yeah, I was being racist against the
I did.
Oh,
And
shit.
she's like, "I didn't know you Indians were with these 3 white people." Fucking baby racist ass bitch. And I was just like, and then her racist boss comes in to save her. She's like, "You can't berate my staff. I am a Latina queer woman." And like, I'm like, whatever. She had blonde hair. Like, shut up.
You know, the amount of racists that claim the LGBTQ
I
community.
know.
Oh, it's like a
That's why in many
thing.
ways I won't do it. I don't want to even get near that community because not the labeling of that community.
Mm-hmm.
I'd rather go with an indigenous definition. At least you know the lens. The groups that do organize from a lens of decolonization, you know where they're coming from. But there's so many white privilege, and it doesn't have to be even white, just like the privilege at this point. The racism shows up in different ways. A lot of Islamophobes. So many Islamophobic comments and slurs came back to me from the very community that claims to be marginalized. But, you know, I see it as a space. The LGBTQ community has been a space that's been co-opted by white supremacy. It has. And they're just one, and the disability community. There's community, the disabled community. It's the same thing. Say, "Oh, but I'm disabled." It's like, everybody's disabled. All people of color. I mean, like, not to take away from the disability, don't get me wrong, but it's the amount of abuse that when they co-opt those spaces and the damage they do is really, you know, it's alarming.
And like how Melanie mentioned earlier too, like the Hispano community is basically the white supremacist community because they're like because how close they are to like being white or being European or whatever. That's why they call themselves Hispanos, because they're
colonized
from Spain, you know.
They're very attached to like the Spanish colonial history of New Mexico, but they'll definitely like invoke the people of colorness of a Hispano identity within a U.S. racial economy versus like a Spanish kind of conquistador glorification when it suits them. But through and through, they're like the most anti-Indian people.
Anti-black.
And
and
Islamophobe. I mean, like
just through and through, completely racist.
There's
just check all the white supremacy boxes.
And there's an inside struggle, an inner struggle between the the Chicano community and the Hispanic community.
Oh yeah, because they're not the same.
They're completely different, but at the same time, they cross, on different on different issues. They can, crisscross. Some of them do, at least. They'll say, oh, they're Chicano, or they'll say they're Hispano. It's a really mixed batch for sometimes with some of the activists that claim. But definitely, I've seen a lot of racism.
Yeah. Anyways, fuck pig and fig.
Negative
There's a
thousand.
few restaurants that actually targeted a couple of the Muslim women who exploited them in the media. Anyways, they're white women who converted to Islam but wore the hijab, and they wouldn't be served some of the places. So yeah, well, you need to let people know, because that is a tool in your hand. People shouldn't be giving them dollars.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to let a business grow off the discrimination of an indigenous community.
What was the name of that restaurant? Let's get on the podcast.
Yeah, let's just. What are these restaurants you're talking about?
Oh, I don't remember the name.
Is it here in Albuquerque?
Yes, I'll find it out for you. But I think that's a good podcast. Come back with the names and let's just.
Yeah,
it's just like an
people.
hour and a half list.
Yeah. So, the Santa Fe Governor's Palace, La Fonda, just going throughout like
The whole city of Santa Fe, New Mexico.
no, the entire
Fe
city of Albuquerque.
Santa Fe is very exclusive. It's very racist, and there's a lot of good people, but for the most part, it's a big battle, and it has to be. People have to be identified, for the lack of a better word. But for
Liberals
sure,
are sneaky.
you need to. They are. Yeah,
They're sneaky racists.
I don't consider myself a liberal. I am a progressive, and I think progressive has been co-opted, but it has to be.
Yeah, I don't see you as a liberal.
No, I'm not. Well, they permeate all so
Samia, you're so rad. I like. It's hard for me to see you as a Democrat.
I know.
I'm telling you, I was crying when I saw Biden. It's like, what am I doing? But I
so
believe.
Sorry, Samia.
I feel like
it's hard, but you have to have the drive to push forward, to impact in every space. And the vote is something Americans have, they don't use. So popular vote is very important. But then you look at what's happening right now, that's even being jeopardized. So it's a battle. It's a battle.
I mean, good on you for still being involved in that stuff. Because we claim you a progressive, yes, but you're also like, if I can say this on air, a radical.
As you can say, I'm a radical.
And so we claim you in that tradition.
That I'll wear as a badge of honor coming from Melanie. All right. You gave me an indigenous stamp of approval. That's an honor.
Oh, for damn sure.
I have to say that our journey together, working together, when we first started to work on the Indigenous Day, that brings chills up my spine, because the experience. I mean, talk about tears. That was a lot. Going through city council, getting the proclamation of making Indigenous Day.
I have it up there.
The proclamation's right there.
I finally framed it.
Good for you.
It was.
Yeah.
It was framed before. It was like.
I have a copy of that too. I have a copy of that at home. But the whole group that was there, and then just the meetings beforehand, we have to mention City Councilman Ray Garduno at the time, and you and all the other leaders, and Nick, and but just seeing the march itself and being able to speak to, we had a good attendance. What would you have? Over 1,000, 1,500 maybe?
Yeah.
At least
at the march.
Yeah.
And rally.
At the march and rally, it was the first Indigenous Day. I think one of the second marches in the country.
Oh yeah, it was
It's
historic.
probably the second, yeah.
Yeah.
And as I spoke, we spoke in front of what's that? The military.
Not Raytheon.
The other one.
Not Hewlett Packard. That's a printing company.
Oh my God, I forgot.
Halliburton,
Anyways,
not Halliburton.
One of them we spoke.
Embarrassing.
It was right at the heels of
Yes.
the attacks on Gaza.
Yes,
And
I remember.
and just talking about the military-industrial complex. But the tears came down my eyes every time I remember the indigenous faces of not the organizers, just regular folks, and the folks that came up to me after I spoke. I remember saying, "This the color of the soil is the color of it's the same as the color of your skin. This is your land," and people were like in a daze. Men were in a daze that would come up to me. You're elderly, would say, "Thank you." Just thank you for the acknowledgement. Acknowledgement is very important. Anytime, and I thank you for having me join the march and speaking, but it was an empowering moment for all of us, recognizing how we all build solidarity and we lift one another. And I promised myself I will always lift up Indigenous voices. The Women's March was one of those platforms, which it was a battle nationally, and it was. We all know that we don't want to even discuss to go back in history and how bad the Islamophobic and anti-Palestinian it was. But I stuck to Women's March because I believed in a progressive grassroots feminist agenda, and I knew we belonged there, we as a community. And I remember how many times Red Nation, when they first came on to speak, how radical it was, and people were very uncomfortable with listening. And I remember we challenged, but to see 5 years later, Red Nation Pueblo Action Alliance are the first on the list to speak in the most widest spaces. They're making that platform and making sure that you're there because they recognize if they want to have people there, they have to recognize they have to be authentic voices from people on the ground. And kudos to you for sticking through. And I'll always support that. But
Wow.
Is that the one? Is that the one that Deb Haaland was at? The one that right after Trump came to power to presidency, or are you talking about a different one?
well, we have had marches for 5 years, but I remember when Melanie spoke, and then when Deb Haaland spoke,
It was that year.
Deb Haaland came in, and
People were very uncomfortable with the Red
Yeah.
Nation.
we was like, where can we hide?
We were like, we got
not me,
one
the
person.
people that were on the ground.
We got one of ours speaking at this podium at Civic Plaza with all of these like officials or whatever. We're going up there with them, and like we like all sat in like rows of chairs and like made Red Nation block, and then every year after that they're just like no more.
You know what? And people had to hear it. I have to say, at the time she was land commissioner, newly elected land commissioner, Stephanie Garcia Richards. I still have to commend her for being very graceful, and gave space. And because I talked to her the next day, and it's like, we need to have the platform for authentic voices. She said, Samia, absolutely, absolutely, 100%.
I don't remember what I did exactly, but I just remember like calling that woman Stephanie like out to her face, and then like to like sort of for the cameras, out of like awkward uncomfortableness, like she walked on stage and like gave me a weird hug.
Oh,
I was like,
no, I don't remember any of this.
Get off of me.
But she has done, I mean, compared to others, she's done some good work as far as environmental. But that's a different discussion.
This is back in my early days too. I was like,
All of you,
I was like,
all
land
of you.
commissioner? No.
because traditionally land commissioners, just like they're the oil and gas industry, right?
Yeah. This is
And
when
when
I was
Deb Haaland became our Secretary of Interior, and she's in charge of all the land, there was a lot of pushback to have an Indigenous woman because the symbolism alone
oh man.
was challenging the system.
You,
Now, what she's done, we don't, she's trying, but, we have to support in every capacity. But going back to the march, the radical voices of Melanie and everybody else that ever spoke from Red Nation, alongside the Chicana voices and the Black voices and all the good radical voices who were radical in the sense that authentic to the struggle and to the liberation. And, it just has to be said. And it was, and I'm so proud. I think that's probably one of the most important accomplishments in my mind, at least, that we were able all to share that space next to elected officials. So your voice is just equal to elected officials, and it was always centered. When we had our last march with the governor on stage after Roe, the decision with the rulings, everybody was there, and we had some of the Red Nation, Pueblo Action Alliance, we had the Indigenous Women Rising Crew. These are the voices that were at the top of the list. Within the feminist movement, how much have we shifted? And I'm going to say we had a tremendous impact on that. So kudos to us.
Yeah, because you're reminding me of like the world that was before you could.
Everybody rejected you. Everybody rejected you.
You're right. We just made people profoundly uncomfortable all the time.
That's the way to do it. You heard it here.
It's so funny you said that because I just like forgot. I just forgot all the dozens and dozens.
I don't
and
forget. You want to know why? You want to know why? Still, everything I've done for the community and brought up and helped, I make people uncomfortable saying free Palestine.
Yeah, that's true.
They still cringe or shy or they don't know what to do with me.
But what about the Israelis?
Well, you know what? Jewish Voice for Peace. There's many Jews who stand in solidarity, and nobody can say. Nobody has a real argument, and there's no real argument for saying you're not going to stand up for human rights. Solidarity is good medicine, as Enrique says. It's true.
It really is.
It's true.
That's actually a really good place to bring it to a close.
Yes.
Solidarity is medicine.
Yes.
It is. It's healing. I think that's why I was crying in the beginning of this conversation.
Yeah.
Why I got so emotional, because like I don't think it was because it was from a place of like sadness or even anger. It was I think I was healing on camera because I was processing thoughts and emotions that I had about Palestine that I haven't even processed yet. And I began crying, and like how I was crying on the plane, or how I was crying months and months after the trip. And here I am crying again because I'm still coming to these profound conclusions.
Yes.
And I'm so in awe of like sometimes I don't know, it's just I'm just so in awe of like the solidarity that exists and how it exists and how profoundly beautiful it is. And Kutawaha Samia, this was such an amazing conversation.
Thank you.
Like
Thank you so
much.
Well, I love you too. You know that. We're here.
Do you have closing words, Melanie?
Just that, like, no matter what gets thrown at us, a million daily cuts of indignity, right? That we were talking about, death threats.
That's a book, by the way.
I mean, okay. It actually might be. Am I still? Anyway, it's not an original thought. Original phrase.
Okay.
Or, death threats from fascists or betrayals by people we thought were on our team and who had our backs. It's like we still need to remember that we're beautiful. Absolutely. And that we're strong, and that when we need to show up for each other to carry each other through those difficult times, that I just want all of our Palestinian listeners to know that Red Nation will always be here. Always. We will never, ever walk away, and we will never give up on liberation. Like, that's the vow we make. That's why we play this game.
No, on the real. I'll die for Palestinian comrades. I swear.
Well, I count on you all the time. There's not one action I've ever called, you're the first people I dial, because I know you are family, and it comes from a space from the heart. I know you do it because you mean it, and it's not just for show. And you have family in me, you know that. And we stand in solidarity for the liberation of our indigenous communities and our brothers and sisters. It's an emotional moment for me. I mean, just to understand.
We don't get to reflect like this very often, I think, and that's why
we're always fighting. We're always marching. We're always doing things, and it's
sometimes
hard to
we're
be
like
vulnerable. Vulnerability is something we're not afforded
ever.
And it's privileged.
And we're also expected, I think, to just always talk about like the politics of things. So it's like this is a moment to engage in political education. So what is settler colonialism, and like what is solidarity, and like why is Palestine important to the indigenous struggle? And that's my NPR voice. And those are things that are important, don't get me wrong. But like it's also just important for us to talk to each other as like relatives, to just be really honest about the struggle, but also just like to dream together in this way. And how this podcast went down is how it was meant to go down. And I'm going to listen back to this. I'm going to cry again.
Totally authentic.
Oh, I'm going to cry like big and hard when I'm not off camera.
You know, you relieved a lot off my chest, but there's a book in me or two. But I'm glad that you invited me to this podcast. Absolutely healing space. And I extend my hand over and over to all of you in solidarity, you know.
Aww.
All our love and solidarity to Palestinians and Palestine. And we say it over and over again, but we're not free until Palestine's free.
Yes.
Yeah, we mean it.
It's literally how it's gonna happen. Like
literally.
Yeah, literally.
We've seen it.
Yeah.
That's a Yoda thing to say. Yeah. But seriously.
It's a Yoda thing to say.
It's a Yoda thing to say. But we're Indigenous. We live in Yo Town. One thing before we sign off, we never created the feminist version of the bromance.
Oh, did you come up with something?
No. It's just making it up.
Romance.
I mean, we could do this like because we're like at an hour and 24 minutes, but
all
we can do this.
Passes by when you're having fun. Wow.
I'm kind of brain dead, and it's like 100 degrees in here.
Yeah.
Right now.
I was actually thinking a good title might be Solidarity is Medicine.
Okay, yeah, let's do that.
Solidarity is medicine. You said it yourself, Samia. That is what.
Well, I quoted Enrique Carriel, so nobody always says it.
Okay, all right.
So but it's a New Mexico thing. Absolutely. Solidarity is medicine.
I will come back with the femme version of romance, though,
all right,
eventually.
Cool. And then we can normalize it within movement lingo. Well, thank you again for coming to the office.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And yeah, Patreon. Consider joining our Patreon.
Yeah. No, I'm gonna record it. Okay, yeah.
That's okay.
All right. Please sign our Patreon. Please keep up with the Red Nation podcast tour, guest hosted by Justine and Kai in 2022. It's a working title. Please keep up with our series. We're on day 7. We still got 3 more days going. And thank you, Melanie. Thank you, Samia, for joining.
Yep.
This was absolutely a conversation that needed to be on this tour.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Aww.
Teba out.